Hi everyone, it is just coming up to after 5 past, so we've had our 15-minute break. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if I could take some learning from today, it would be to chair my senior management team meetings just as efficiently as we have today in terms of keeping everyone to time. So thank you everyone for coming back. I'm going to introduce you now to our final speaker before we go into our Q&A session, and that is Paul Watson, who is a lecturer in mental health nursing, and he's going to be talking about the lived experience of children and young people who become young carers due to their father's combat-related PTSD. So I believe we've got Paul's presentation recorded, and we're going to start that now, but Paul is double secretly in the background just in case something doesn't work out, but I can't believe for a moment that that is going to happen. We're good to go.
Hello, my name is Paul Watson. I'm a lecturer at Northumbria University in mental health and school nursing. I'm also a PhD candidate, and my PhD is looking at young carers of veterans with mental health issues, particularly PTSD. My PhD is underpinned from a theoretical framework of symbolic interactionism, and it's an ontological assumption based on the belief that reality is socially constructed, and an emic epistemology built on subjective lived experience using narrative inquiry. Using symbolic interactionism as an ontological approach to understanding the perceptions of one's truth, as described by Mead, is built on what we believe to be true, and is based on how we and others communicate what we believe are those truths. Therefore, one could argue reality is constructed by observations, interpretations, perceptions, and our conclusions, which are established by shared narratives. Therefore, investigating interactions and the consequences of those interactions. Emic epistemology, an insider's view of reality, is one of the principal concepts which guide qualitative research and my PhD. An emic perspective is fundamental to understanding how people perceive the world around them. Moreover, adapting an emic perspective allows the multiple realities, variations of knowledge, resulting in numerous interpretations of the lived experience which exists within this specific culture. And importantly, is determined by local custom, meaning, and belief, which is best described by a native of the culture. Being a cultural insider myself has enabled me to really understand the cultural aspect of military life and being a young carer within the military community. Why inquiring into the narratives are important in truly understanding the lived experience. To understand what it is to be a young carer from a military family, we must hear the voice of the young carer. When we capture this voice, what are we doing with it? We have two options. We can use the narratives captured and analyze the individual or collectives to understand the themes from the told stories. This process allows for stories to be used as data in helping shape temporality within the young carer's life, which in turn will help capture sensitive periods, changes in role, change in presentation, adaptations within their lives, and the effects caring has, be that positive or negative. Essentially, we get a whole picture of the young carer's life course. However, if we then inquire into the captured narratives, we can interpret and assign meaning. Inquiring into the narratives of the lived experience of a young carer of a veteran with PTSD provides insight into the meaning of the words they are sharing. Therefore, meanings are modified based on the individual's interpretation of the narrator or researcher. For example, the term young carer is a socially constructed label based on a given role within the family dynamic by health and social care professionals. Moreover, importantly, the term young carer may also hold a different meaning to the individual, which may go some way as to explain the difficulty in recruiting a young person who is yet to know they are a young carer. Importantly, defining the label or symbolic meaning of being a young carer within the concepts of symbolic interactionism's traditions, the goal for my PhD is to give understanding to the complex world of the lived experience of being a young carer of a veteran with PTSD and unveil an insider's view of their reality. The use of narrative inquiry within my research is orientated towards producing an understanding of the young carer's experience of living with a parent with PTSD, who is also a military veteran. Exploring how this experience affects their emotional health and how caring affects the young carer's activities of daily living. As Phoenix, Smith and Sparks explain, narratives are a form of inquiry suited to exploring the lived experience of others, due to narratives being a process which people use to make sense of their life's journey. Being a young carer of a veteran with PTSD. As a young carer of a veteran myself, I lived with a very similar life to many of the young carers within my research, and possibly more young carers from the military community and beyond. You'll notice from the following story of my life, if you record and present my narratives, you will be able to produce structural context over time and see themes which are emerging throughout my whole life, from being a child, a young person, and transitioning into a young carer. However, if we look at the words spoken, we can inquire into what those words mean and apply theory to them to help understand their meaning further. I was born in Manchester and I grew up in a council estate in Glossop. I wasn't a military child at that point. My mum and dad separated. I was then, shared between my mother and my father. My mum met my then-to-be stepfather, who was in the military and was soon to be posted to Germany. This relationship was quite quick, and by the time I was 4, I was living in Germany. Being a military child was something that I did enjoy. There was friends on tap. Schools were good, but there was a lot of cultural differences that I noticed. There was a lot of drinking. There was some domestic violence within my household, and I think it wasn't until I was maybe 10 that my stepfather went to the first Gulf War. And that when he come back, there was a total change in his presentation. He was drinking more. There was considerable domestic violence. He turned to gambling, and it just become really difficult. And I was quite scared of the person that he had become, which kind of changed the dynamic. But my mum was working 3 or 4 jobs to help with the bills because of the gambling, and I was providing care for my brother. I was pretty much looking after my younger brother, who is 6.5 years younger than me. I was also providing emotional care for my mum because of the strains of what was going on, and it kind of came to a head once at one point where there was significant domestic violence and the police came, and I think from then life changed. They separated, and we moved on. But I think the effects of that, have followed me throughout my adolescence and my adulthood, due to some of the sites that I've seen throughout my childhood, and they did have a negative effect on me. And I've always been searching for something, which I didn't know what it was until I've found my wife. To be fair, but I think when we look at a young carer's life as of a veteran with PTSD. It's complex and it's hard, and it does have lasting effects. But as you can tell from my narrative, there's a whole life story, a start, a middle, and an end. But if you picked up some of the words or the sentences, for example, I felt scared, especially when it was quiet. In its simplest form, I'm describing an action. I went scared when the house went silent. However, if we break this down, we're looking at a time frame. When it went quiet, we're also seeing a product of time, feeling scared. Therefore, we have an action and a consequence of that action. This inquiring into the narrative of the lived experience. So what happens if we don't engage children in research? As noted in the current slides, there are a number of studies which offer the perspectives due to the difficulty in ethical application and multiple reasons why access to this unique population is difficult. Therefore, if we don't hear the voice from this population, we will continually get the perceptions of others who may be witnessing the acts or the emotions from young carers or veterans with PTSD without truly inquiring into the life of that young carer. Children's rights to be part of the research is fundamental. Research with children is acceptable and entirely valid where the research question posed is important to the health and well-being of the child or the children, or in this case, the young carers. The perception of children in this study is essential in capturing their experience of family life prior to and after caring. Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child states that a child who is capable of forming his or her own views should have the right to express their views freely on all matters affecting the child. And those views should be given weight in accordance with age and maturity. Therefore, it's important for those carrying out research on children, young people, and young carers to continually reflect on the power imbalance in the processes of research when conducting research with children and young people and young carers, which, as a cultural insider, is a continual battle and something I continually have to reflect on. Empowering children to consent to take part in research freely without coercion, threat, or persuasion, even if a gatekeeper has provided consent, acknowledging the child as an expert in their own life, and promoting autonomy whilst validating their narratives regarding being a young carer is vital. So why inquiring into the voice of young carers is important? When we look into the short narrative within the slide, we can see an overall picture of what is going on for that young carer in a moment of time. And we can see themes from within each text. For example, the first one reads, "I miss him a lot. Something is missing at home. We have a big house. And when someone is missing, it's like empty." This describes a parent being away. But when we inquire into the narratives, we can see the feelings and the emotions behind the parent being away. Therefore, we find meaning to the context of that moment in that young carer's life. The third extract provides something more. "I try to help my dad, but he keeps pushing me away. So I feel I am doing wrong." Here we can see a young carer being pushed away when they're trying to support their father. When we inquire into the narrative, we can see the actions, reactions are rejection, which makes the young carer feel they are wrong. If we add a theory of context, trying to help and being rejected, we might look at attachment theory and its association with a secure base. However, when we look at it from a symbolic interactionism position, we can see the symbol. The dad has changed and he's now rejecting his child. Therefore, the symbolic meaning of dad changes and the child becomes hesitant to provide interaction for fear of being rejection. Therefore, meaning between the interaction and outcome changes. For instance, if I try and I help my father, will I get pushed away? Which was different prior to Afghanistan. When I try and help, I get praised and we have fun. would like to introduce one of the young carers within my study. And whilst I introduce this young carer, I'd like you to just kind of read what's going on and look at the narrative analysis within there. Okay. So this young carer is 14 years old, and whose parents split up when they were young, when she was younger. She doesn't really kind of know her father, and then her mum started a relationship with a veteran who served in the armed forces, obviously. But seeing some things in combat which was horrific, and subsequently was diagnosed with PTSD. Okay. So you can see from narrative analysis, there is a start, a middle, and an end, offering temporality in this young carer's life. However, when we inquire into the narratives, we can see a number of meanings which, when extracted from the data, leads to pertinent theoretical text. For example, when the young carer describes a presentation of PTSD, her actions change and she becomes a protector of her brothers, but also her mum, due to domestic violence. Acting as a protector as a child or a young person has the capability to change the wiring within our neurotransmitters. There becomes a presentation of being on high alert and trying to anticipate and forecast, as described as walking on eggshells. Living with domestic violence, girls are more likely to keep their distress inside. They become withdrawn from other people and become anxious or depressed. They may think badly of themselves and complain of vague physical symptoms. They are more likely to have an eating disorder or to harm themselves by taking overdoses or cutting themselves. They are also more likely to choose an abusive partner themselves. Children of any age can develop symptoms of what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. They may get nightmares, flashbacks, become very jumpy, and have headaches and physical pains. We are able then to add contextual meaning when we understand the inquired narratives of the young carer and the physical and emotional effects caring has on this young carer. Moreover, we can apply the science behind the role of this young carer and provide appropriate and timely support and intervention. So a second participant within my research is a sibling, and his sister was part of the research as well. Now, this young person has a really good relationship with their dad. And during kind of Afghanistan, his father was injured and was brought back to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. The children couldn't attend, and this caused significant anxiety and stress for both children within the homes. Then his father went back to Afghanistan for a second and third time, and due to the experiences of his father being injured the first time, there was heightened anxiety of whether they were going to get a knock on the door or whether the phone rang, if they were potentially to think about whether his father was injured again or worse, had passed away. But when we look at these narratives again, okay, and when we inquire into this young carer's narratives, we can see a number of meanings due to the change in presentation of his father, and the symbol of his dad changes to something to avoid opposed to interact with, which we can see from the first extract, a solid relationship. Importantly, when we inquire into the fourth extract, we can see that presentation of the father is something this young carer has become used to. When we apply theory to this sentence, we can utilize the works of Dr. Burke Harris, who articulates the body stress response is regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis. When the body receives a threat or stress, the brain signals the hypodermis, which releases hormones that trigger the pituitary gland. This pituitary gland then releases a different hormone that stimulates an adrenaline gland to produce adrenaline and cortisol. The example Dr. Burke shares within her TED Talks and her writings are as follows. Imagine that you're walking through the woods and suddenly you come across an angry bear. Your natural instinct is to run away from the danger. Within your body, you release a series of hormones that govern your response to stress. It is this hormonal process that triggers the innate reaction to fight or flight when you're in danger. When the body reacts to a threat or stressor, in this case, the angry bear in your path, the brain triggers a series of hormone releases that activate the production of adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is a hormone that is central to the body's short-term response to stress, increasing the body's heart rate and causing pulse dilation so the body is better equipped to combat the threat. Cortisol is a critical hormone in the body's long-term response to stress, increasing blood pressure and blood sugar to regulate the body's metabolism and immune response. Now imagine that angry bear is a regular occurrence on your walk home, but you never know if you're going to see him or not. So every day your body is producing cortisol to make sure that you're ready to run away in case you see the angry bear. Your body's stress response systems is chronically activated. Your bodies are not meant to be in a state of constant stress response. As characterized by the term fight or flight, the body's stress response developed as a response to short periodic threats. Over time, this strong, frequent, or chronic stress can lead to the dysregulation of the body's stress response system, meaning that the system responds in an unhealthy way and sometimes producing inappropriate amounts of cortisol, sometimes responding to small or inappropriate threats. This is potentially the young carer's body living in toxic stress. So when we analyze the narratives, what we see from the two young carers within this presentation is a temporal shift in their life course. We see their once stable and affectionate relationship with their father prior to Afghanistan change over time due to the presence of PTSD and the symptomology of its presentation. Moreover, we see their home environment change from something which is full of love, affection, and safety, turn into a place where they hide away, isolate themselves, protect and support others, and become hypervigilant, preparing for a potential emotional attack or toxic stress. The narratives then move to a place where there is an acceptance and engagement in services for those with PTSD. This positive intervention really shifts the course of the narratives among all the young carers. They describe having a diagnosis and by providing a caring role has seen a shift in their relationship with their fathers. It is worth noting, none of the participants classed themselves as a young carer. However, during the interviews, they could identify their roles in which they undertook out of love. It was great to see through providing care, the young carers had established connections with their father, albeit very different to the one they had pre-Afghanistan. When we inquire into the narratives and its findings, many things come out. We look at adverse childhood experiences. First published in 1998, the Adverse Child Experience Study was a simple but profound study that revolutionized how we understood the relationship between childhood and long-term health of adults. The result of the ACE study was astonishing. Almost 2/3 of participants reported having one or more childhood adverse experiences. 1 in 8 participants reported having 4 or more ACEs. The most commonly reported ACE was physical abuse, substance abuse by a household member, and parental separation or divorce. And being a military family, whilst the ACE study does kind of allude to separation being moving away from your family or your parents separating, I think what we have is something quite unique in the terms that we often are separated from our family members due to service. And I think that's a really good pertinent point that we have to note and take account for when we're looking at adversities in childhood. Even more alarming, research found strong correlations between ACEs and poor health outcomes among participants. Research found increased risk of disease and negative health behaviours. When we look at inquiring into the narratives of these young carers of veterans with PTSD, we can see a number of adverse childhood experiences. Whilst not wanting to pathologize or medicalize being a young carer, I feel it is important that we understand their narratives of vocalizing a number of adverse experience, which in turn creates meaning. What does this mean for young carers of veterans with PTSD? Neglect. The inquired narratives demonstrate when a parent presents with PTSD, they're not emotionally connected to their child. The young carer reports not connecting emotionally, feeling isolated, and explain feeling of rejection of affection from their fathers. Home dysfunction, living with parental PTSD, domestic violence, substance abuse, and for some, divorce. Again, we have that constant separation due to service. Therefore, it is important to understand the effects of caring for a veteran with PTSD due to the short, medium, and long-term psychological and physical effects of adversity in childhood, along with some of the well-explored negative effects of providing care as a young person. At this point, my presentation is finished, but I really would like to thank you all for listening. But more importantly, I'd really like to thank you for doing what you do, wanting to support young carers and young carers from military families to create positive outcomes. But I think when we look at inquiring into those narratives, we can see so much more of that young carer and what that means to the context of the theory in which we can add to help shape service provision and more research. But I think fundamentally it is about hearing that voice and not just hearing it for the purpose of hearing it. It's taking action on specifics within that voice. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Some food for thought there, certainly. So what I'm going to do now is to invite, I'm going to go straight into the Q&A. We're running a little bit early. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we'll go straight into our Q&A, which can either overrun or finish within the 45-minute slot that it's got. And so I wonder if I can ask Joe Jukes, Helen Ledbetter, Tracy Park, Helen Goff, Joe Boyd, Sue Libbard, Emma Hughes, Andrea Collins, Paul Watson and Alan Barry to return to the screen, please, or at the very least switch your cameras back on, and then hopefully we can see you all and we can do a bit of a Q&A. Paul, it's nice to actually see what you look like. I think you're one of the successful recordings.
Yeah, I've got my lockdown hair.
Oh, haven't we all? I've got an appointment on the 12th of April. I tell you, I hope it actually happens, because I'm going to be pushed way back if it doesn't. Listen, everyone, thank you for coming back. Thank you for your extraordinary stories today. I really do appreciate it. So what I've got here are a series of questions, some of which are directed specifically at you, and some of which are slightly more general questions. And at the end, when we kind of wrap this up, I'm going to I'm just ask each of you for your reflections on today, and if you had one takeaway, what would that one takeaway from today be? So I'm going to let you have, you've got like about 40 minutes to work that out. So so that's what I'm going to kind of wind the day up on. So who have we got here? Because I'm not sure if I can see everybody on my screen or not. Have we got Joe Jukes with us still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hi, Joe. Okay, so, oh, yes, I can see you now. Brilliant. So there was one question here, which I remember you talking about, I think that you had written in about your experience because you couldn't attend an appointment. And the question was really is, how do we share narratives of family members' experience if you can't attend those appointments for the person that you care for? How do you know who the person is to write to, if you like, or how do you reach out to them and contact them to share that family experience?
So under the Op Courage, there is email addresses and phone numbers under tills that you can connect with. So for instance, when I self-referred into tills, Dave just gave permission on the phone and he said, yeah, he can confirm his service. He confirmed that, yes, he was struggling. And then he gave verbal permission for me to speak on his behalf. So to tell his story on his behalf. There was no problem with that whatsoever. They didn't question that. And then when his appointment came through for his assessment, he had ticked the box where he preferred to have contact either via email or by text, because he had great anxiety of talking on the phone. He didn't quite know who was going to be at the end of the phone. A lot of people I've spoken to have that same problem. So I then replied to that email because it was from the person that was going to assess him, and sent in my statement. And I also sent it into the main tills email address that is listed on Op Courage, and sent it into them, and then followed that up with, can you confirm that you have had this and you have passed it to the person that is going to do the assessment? So I kind of followed it through. So that's how you can do it.
It's kind of, it's something we hear from carers a lot. It's about that tenacity, isn't it? You have to just keep going and keep going and keep going on behalf of the person you care for until you get the result that you need. And it's hugely exhausting. Emma, if I may, I'm going to come to you with another specific question about your talk. And I suppose it's an obvious one. If you have these significant care responsibilities, this brilliant support around you, why do you still have to move? Is there no way that you could have asked not to? I know that's a difficult question to ask.
No, so originally I should have only had 2 years here anyway, because as a W2 you only get a 2-year posting. So I kind of managed to extend. So I had my first year was maternity, then I had 2 years, and I have managed to extend for a further 2. Honestly, I don't know why. It's all set in place here. It really, really does work for me. And I have asked to stay, but I mean, I think that the frustrating thing is for me is I won't promote this year because we're sort of slowing down in promotion. So there's no effect on my career if I did stay, but they just don't like you to. And
no, I understand. It's it just seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it? This particular kind of.
It's frustrating because I'm having to do all this when technically nobody wants to come here, and I could stay, and I've got all the support and a fantastic team. And clearly that all has to change, so it's frustrating, really frustrating.
Yeah. Okay, so
I think on that subject, if I may, there is an assumption in the military that that all of us will move. Usually, a military post lasts 2-3 years at a time.
Yeah.
And then it's very much that sort of career driver that usually just about the time that we're starting to get the hang of a job, it's time to move on to the next one. And that's seen as growing, it's seen as career progression. And certainly that came up from Michelle's research, that people, I think, were quite frightened to announce their status as carers because they feared the impact that would have on their career. If a career manager has a choice and says, well, this person can go anywhere and do anything, they're very promotable. We want this person. And this person, not so much. It still has that stigma and that impact. So I'm not surprised Emma is feeling a reluctance to move. I know it's had an impact on a number of families that I'm aware of.
Yeah, thank you. So Helen Ledbetter, are you with us? Because I can only see 9 people on my screen. Peter, I wonder if you might be able to turn your camera off for us. Helen, are you there? Helen Ledbetter. Okay, in that case, I'm going to go to Paul because this is about young carers particularly. So I was going to ask Helen, but the question was, with young carers and service families, does the collective responsibility mean it is easier for young people to fall through the gaps? Paul, you're on mute, sorry.
I wanted to be that person, sorry.
Yeah, you've done brilliantly.
I think from my experience as being a school nurse in Catterick Garrison, I think it's not just young carers who potentially fall through the gap, and I think it's quite down to quite a lot of the local commissioning and the postcode lottery. Because I know some of the young people that I worked with in Catterick, and one specifically, she was under some really good care for nocturnal and daytime enuresis. And then when she moved to Catterick, she had me, who'd done a course for the afternoon. You know, and that difference in equity and equality throughout the country, and especially if you go abroad as well, I think there are, you know, times that children and young people and young carers from military families can fall through a perceived gap in service provision. And I think it's sometimes due to lack of knowledge of the military system and not knowing kind of how it works in terms of that commissioning of services. So yeah, that's kind of my experience from being a school nurse and working with a number of young carers within my research.
And I think this is probably a more general question for many of you, actually. So whether you would say that there was a greater stigma within the armed forces if your child's a carer, that your child could be a carer. Is there a stigma there? I mean, I think there's a stigma around it per se, but any views on that from anyone? Paul, I don't know if you want to start.
I know from my point of view, in terms of my research, I couldn't recruit a young carer. I had to change my advertising to a child or young person who lives with a parent with PTSD. And it was through those narratives that we kind of came to the fact that, yeah, there were young carers. And it is that construction, isn't it, of you know, that title. And a lot of them said, well, I'm just helping my dad, or I'm just helping my mum, or I'm just helping my sister, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, I think it is that identification, but it's that self-identification, and do they need to be identified? And that's, you know, that's another question which, you know, some of them were saying to me, you know, why do we need to be identified?
And I guess to Alan's earlier point, maybe there's a reluctance in case it has an impact on a serving person's career, maybe.
Sorry, I personally don't know because I've just worked with veteran children or young carers. Sorry, so. Okay.
Okay, so I mean, feel free, people, to chip in even if it's not your question. So I'm going to keep on powering through them all. These are the ones that are under sort of Tracy, Helen, and Joe. So you're the starter for tens, and then others can come in. So one of the questions here was about whether there are similar initiatives across the UK, or is this exclusively Wiltshire's project, or have you shared that more widely?
Oh, hello, this is Helen.
Hi.
Sorry. I'm just trying to get my camera on, sorry. Yes, we have shared, but we have shared in the sense of being commissioned to set up a couple of pilots to help other areas set things up. I'm very happy to talk to colleagues about, certainly in terms of GP accreditation and not in military bases. I, as the GP accreditation scheme worker, I'm happy to carry on talking to people about that, but it's not something where it's appropriate to just literally share the information. The success of the Wiltshire scheme was very much because there was a working group and there was buy-in and a lot of vested interest. Tracy may well want to talk about the military side.
Tracy, I'm going to have to do the age-old, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, so we've been using the framework of the Wiltshire GP accreditation scheme. We're running the pilot with the Tidworth Medical Centre with Joe Boyd, and we're hoping to roll out the scheme to all of the medical centres in Wiltshire. But like I say, it's just a pilot at the moment, and we're looking for seeking endorsement from some hierarchy within the NHS and the med centres. So anybody out there listening, we'd love you to endorse our accreditation scheme. And like I say, Joe has been working with us for the past 18 months, 2 years now in the Tidworth Centre, and we're looking to roll it out later on this year to the rest of the medical centres in Wiltshire.
Great stuff. Thanks. There's a question here about government grant funding. I don't know if you can help on this. So
Yeah.
it's ring-fenced. How do you think this will endure going forward?
Well, we have at Carer Support Wiltshire, we have a fundraiser who's looking to get our funding, extra funding for the accreditation scheme, and also to continue with the Courage to Care project, because obviously the Armed Forces Covenant funding is coming to an end. So yes, we are looking to get more funding.
Brilliant, thank you. Sue, just some comments for your talk. And the question specifically was whether you have an example, or whether you can give us an example of marginal games that have been used to make a big difference for carers.
I was going to say, possibly I can give a couple of examples. I think an interesting cascade and marginal gains is on the east coast of Lincolnshire. It's an area of high deprivation and a lot of hard to reach groups. And it was the maternal services, it was the maternity services actually that set up a mother and toddler group. So they were finding that midwives and health visitors were struggling to get to mums and the little ones. And so they set up, a centre, invited mums to come. And what was really interesting was, a bit of reluctance, but the mums came with their toddlers. And then what happened was the mums started to bring with them other family members, and including older, grandparents, for example, and carers of some of their family members. And what also happened was then in terms of starting to deliver services to that particular group, the hub team started then to invite GPs to come along, health and social care to come along, social workers to come along to start to support this growing community. But what spun out of that was a carers forum, with the focus being on, let's look at how we support those carers. So I think that's it's a lovely example of a cascade, because they were a really hard to reach group. And it took, as I understand it, just about a year, just over a year to get established, but now it's a really thriving community. And another one is, specifically targeted at carers, is one for everybody to look at, and I think they've written an impact report, is the Rotherham Carers Resilience Service. And their focus really was initially around carers who are looking after people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. And the focus really was on, these are carers who are not in crisis, by the way, is what support is it that you need? So literally going out to them. And they created the GP Link service to provide, that lighter touch. And the ripples have been quite significant in the Rotherham community in terms of carers and building the resilience and the support for carers.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sue. Andrea, can I come to you next? And just so there's a question here about how you think we can improve access to mental health support for armed forces families and carers alongside the enhancements we're seeing to veteran mental health services.
So at the moment, the Veterans Mental Health Services we have do provide support to families of the veterans accessing those services, which I know not everyone is aware of. And if I can just explain what that means. So any veteran accessing the service, if they have an immediate family member, they will be offered an assessment to look at their care needs. And where care needs are identified, they will be supported to access that care and support. And with the permission of the veteran, and where it's seen to support the veteran's recovery, they will also be offered care and treatment within the service as well. What we will be doing over probably the summer of this year is launching an England-wide engagement on veterans' mental health services to inform future provision around an integrated model of care which brings all the existing veterans' mental health services together. And as part of that, we will be looking at the health needs of families and how we can improve on that. And that is something as part of the Armed Forces Family Support Networks, which I talked about earlier, we will be looking at how we can better link in family support with the veterans' mental health services, which are now being referred to under the overarching name of Op Courage, the Veterans' Mental Health and Wellbeing Service, in line with that call for a single point of contact to ease and a front door to support ease of access.
Great stuff. And here's one very specific question. I'm not sure who's the best person to answer it. Whether the GP survey includes people and young people from the armed forces. Anyone know the answer to that? Okay, well, we'll try and find that. I'm going to have one more general question, and then I'm actually going to invite people to put their hands up because we've got there's some very general questions here. So you can put your hand up on Teams by at the top there on the right, and I can see it in participants. But the one more general question that I think most of you will be able to have an answer to is this piece about recognition. How do we help people to self-recognise that they are caring sooner? Or indeed that they care, that it's not just looking after a partner or a child or whatever. How do we improve that recognition piece? Who wants to go first? Wow. You know you're a panel, right?
I'll go first.
Thanks,
I'll break
Dave.
the ice. I think from our perspective, if alongside always talking about Dave's problems and how he presented, if just someone said, and how are you? And how is this impacting the family? I think that would have helped us to identify ourselves more as, do you know what, maybe we need support, because along the way, I know Dave was very outspoken himself about the fact that he got quite angry. He used to say to people, you all ask how I am, you all concentrate on me, but actually in my head this is normal, but I'm not the one living with me. You don't ask how my wife is, you don't ask how my kids are. And he was very outspoken on that, and he used to get quite angry at people. Well, why don't you care about them? And I think just that asking the question would help people to go, actually, how am I doing? What support would help me? Because you're so focused on the person that's actually got the condition and who's getting the support, you almost forget about yourself.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's to Sue's point, isn't it? Small things make big difference. Sue, you came off mute a moment ago. So I'm going to come back to you now.
I did. I think there are a couple of things in so much as, you know, just look at the diversity of organisations and individuals that are here today. And with all of the hats that we wear, if we all took the lead of educating and informing into the communities that we're involved in, or commissioning or asking for the comms teams that we work with to create what I call accessible communication in lots of diverse forms, and there was a push out. I come back to we'll be in the arena of the marginal gains. I think there's a communication piece. We have a tendency, I would argue, to expect NHS England, NHS Improvement to always do that, the big comms from the top. But I think it's incumbent on all of our organisations to look at user-friendly communication to get this messaging out. So I think it's a communications piece, and that we all need to take responsibility for.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel want to add to that?
It's Andrea here. I'd agree with Sue, and it's constantly drip feeding that information both across the NHS, so people are understanding the importance of identifying armed forces families, but also amongst the armed forces community to feel confident. and realising the importance of letting a GP know, I am a member of an armed forces family, can you record that in my patient record, because it will make a difference.
Great stuff. And also, I am a carer. Can you record that
Yes,
in my
yeah,
GP
absolutely.
record? I think that's one of the
Yes.
things we're really trying hard. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think for me, it's all very well that we, drip feed and try to get this identification. I think we also need the infrastructure to support what we are potentially going to identify, because we don't know until we ask. And if we ask too many questions, we might not have the structure to support, what we're going to be finding. So I think there has to be, it has to run parallel with each other. If we are drip feeding and educating, which is absolutely what we must be doing, we have to run alongside that with the service provision, because we don't want to run before we can walk. And I know from my participants in my research, one of them attempted suicide, 2 of them are under CAMS. So this effect is, are we inquiring enough into the lives of these young people? In my case, are we inquiring enough? Are we asking the right questions? Because we know any serious case review, that inquiring practitioner didn't ask enough questions. So if we're having young people who are, or young carers in my case, attempting suicide or under CAMS, why isn't this getting back to, is there an effect? And like Joe was saying, is that family effect compounding that young person's emotional health and well-being? And I think we have to have, that parallel service provision and education.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul. We did have a couple of hands up in the participants list a moment ago, but they seem to have put them down all of a sudden. So, Nikki Murdoch, you have a question. Do you want to come in?
Helen, thank you. I don't really have a question. It's really to support Sue's observations around communication, and it won't surprise you that as the Vice Chair of the Armed Forces PPV, she and I are completely at one. And Andrea knows my view on this in terms of the communications piece. And I think the NHS as a whole do engagement really well. Where I think there's room for improvement is in the communications across the piece, and actually improving the communications to increase accessibility on the wide range of really brilliant initiatives that are in place. But we absolutely have to get the message out there. And again, there's some really good stuff going on. There's a training module in the Royal College of GPs now about armed forces, and they're very receptive to trying to get as much information into a very cramped curriculum, I know. But all of us have our part to play, as Sue and you have said, in terms of making small gains in our own GP practices as we have contact with the NHS to make people the difficulties that people have.
Thanks, Nikki. I've got Richard Swarbrick.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Sorry, I feel like I'm echoing what everybody's saying. Just to go back to the GP point, and in a certain way to to support what Paul was saying, a lot of GPs don't know about these issues until they come across them for the first time. For people that move out of, say, when they move out of the serving community into the veteran community, or they sort of contact the NHS. And of course, the NHS is a system of systems. It's not a sort of neat one-stop shop for everything. And so I think we know from the RCGP and from the practices that a lot of them don't know until they get these issues. Then they really want to learn about it. So by creating the environment for the learning for those practices and the accreditations, and we're going to spread that into the primary care networks, not just the practices, is our plan for the future. I think what's quite interesting, this also applies inside the MOD, because a lot of the principal medical officers and the medical officers in uniform, by definition, see a relatively narrow range of people. And yet the inclusion of civilian medical practitioners and locums widens that experience at the same time, which can only benefit the family and the carers' perspective and the type of service they've got as well as that. And just finally, for all GPs, it's not just the curriculum, but in their final set of exams, they get tested on this now. So this isn't just so this whole syllabus is not just thanks for coming and ticking the box. They now get tested on this, and we feel this is a major step forward, and something that Jonathan Leach and Robin Simpson within the RCGP has added into not just the curriculum, but the final set of exams. So to pick up on Sue's bit by bit point, these are these small steps that we keep taking about continual improvement.
Great stuff. Thank you. Joe, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to carry on about the education part of it. Also, emergency services and outside agencies who come into contact with a family who is dealing with someone with severe PTSD can manifest itself sometimes from the outside as looking like domestic violence. And sometimes you then get a lot of prejudice and a lot of questions asked of you as, why are you with this man? Why would you be standing by this person when look at what they're doing, look at the behaviour they are. If they loved you, this wouldn't happen. And I think it's that the education needs to be widened out to a bigger spectrum of people for them to understand how PTSD can manifest itself as well, and that sometimes people within the family don't need that judgment or prejudice. They just need support in knowing how to manage that period in their life.
Yeah, Andrea, you've got something to add. You're on mute. Sorry.
So just to come in there in response to Joe's comments. So Dr. Jonathan Leach, who's the National Medical Director for Armed Forces Health, has been linking in closely with a number of police forces and different emergency services to share the best practice, what we're doing in particular in terms of trauma-informed care, the identification of specific needs when crisis is happening, and signposting to support. And that there's a lot of interest from the other emergency services of adopting some of that best practice that we've been introducing in relation to veterans' mental health. And just in terms of domestic abuse, there's a lot of work happening at the moment in preparation for the domestic abuse bill, which is currently going through Parliament at the moment, and what the NHS needs to do in response to that, building on what it's already doing, recognising the varying levels of complexities of what domestic abuse entails, ensuring that we're able to best support families and educating those staff who are frontline in terms of identifying those signs and symptoms of domestic abuse. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thanks. No, there aren't any more questions. There's an awful lot of chat going on in the chat box. So obviously people are much happier chatting away in that forum than they are in this. So I'm going to make them listen to you instead. And I'm just going to come around to all of you and ask you that question about your reflections on the day before I give mine. And what if you could only have one takeaway, what would that one takeaway be? Sue, I'm going to come to you first, if I may.
Damn, me first. Right, okay. Actually, my one takeaway relates to something that Andrea shared with us, actually. And it was the importance of collaboration, not competition. Particularly in the area of where there is funding. I understand that. Sometimes we find ourselves in this space looking to compete against each other. If we've all got the same desired outcome, for me, it's about partnership working. It is about an integration of services, a collection of lots of specialisms coming together to create something that's quite substantial and can deliver the services that we're talking about to our armed forces community. So for me, it's a move, it's a mindset shift. It's that move from competing with each other to collaborating with each other. And I think that Andrea really brought that home when she was presenting. So that's mine.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sue. Alan, can I come to you next, please?
That's better. I'm off mute now. Well, Sue has slightly eaten my sandwiches because genuinely my takeaway was going to be about the ecosystem that Sue discussed. But actually, your point there about avoiding competition, I think, is extremely relevant. The people dialed into this meeting from the Candid organisation have heard me say very much this before. In military support terms, FanDef have been around for 30 years. Candid are the new kids on the block. And a bit like an eager puppy, they're full of energy, they're full of life, but sometimes they're a little bit undifferentiated and lacking in direction. And sometimes also their enthusiasm bubbles over. And you mentioned, Sue, about the need for respect. I had worried that some of the very vocal members of the Candid community sometimes just forget that respect thing. And I know that some real harm has been caused by members of that community with members of the SMEs that we engage with FanDef. And over the past year since I took over as chair of FanDef, I've actually found myself often feeling quite resentful and in competition with Candid. I do sometimes find myself thinking, you know, who died and put you guys in charge? Get off my lawn. What are you doing? We were here first. But over the past couple of months, and I said this at the last Candid meeting, I've come to recognise that actually it's much better if those two teams work together. We don't compete. We don't have to admit defeat from FanDef to Candid. We don't have to try to fight against them, and everybody has something to bring to the party. And I know that's going to be a theme over the next couple of FanDef meetings as well. But you beat me to it, Sue. You very much took what I wanted to say.
It's not a competition, I promise. Emma, if I might come to you next, if that's okay.
There we go. I think the main thing for me is, as a carer, is having that voice and being listened to, and trying to be understood as to how my caring role affects my work. And as I've said, my CF team do, and we work around that. And I think it's just being part of a team that can have discussions as opposed to being told I need to do certain things at certain times. Obviously, depending on what care he needs at the time. But yeah, being involved is the main thing for me.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Joe Boyd, you're appearing next on my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah, lovely. So I think for me, it's definitely echoing what Paul has said. If we're going to ask these questions, if we're going to ask carers to identify themselves to us, we need to make sure that we've got that infrastructure to really support them. And I think, especially across the military, we've got medical centres that have got 11, 12,000 patients, and we've got others that have got 600 patients. And we need to be engaging with our partners out there and really enforcing that collaborative working. So we've got somewhere that we can direct our patients or support them with, really.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Paul next, if that's okay.
Yeah, I just want to really echo what people have said. It is about collaboration, but in terms of what's collaborated for me, I think it has to be co-constructed. I think anything that we do for a population that we work with has to be co-constructed. We have, experts by experience, those who live their daily lives, and when we're talking about kind of service improvement, service, development, that voice needs to be heard. It's just not the tokenism of that voice being on a board. It actually has to be heard, and when we kind of have multiple voices sharing different thoughts and ideas, it's about kind of looking at the themes within that, because then it will encapsulate everybody's voice. Even though it might not meet everybody's specific or in particular need, we can kind of look at what the themes are emerging. And I think for me, what we've kind of got today is a lot of themes about providing service provision, about making those contact counts, listening to the voice. So it's about moving this forward in a structural way, which is co-constructed with those that we want to help.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul. Joe Jukes, you've reappeared on my screen at fortunate timing.
I think I totally agree with what Paul has said. I think one of the things that I've started to realise over the last couple of years is that people are being asked for their experiences and they are being listened to a lot more. There's a move away from, well, we've got a policy in place and this is what happens. People are actually realizing that the lived experience and actually making things work, taking on board all of the voices. Sometimes it can be difficult because you might have things in place that you think are working, but then you're met with a whole case where the whole thing fell apart for that family. And that's the ideal key time to go back and look at things and reconstruct things for the better of people going forward. And I think collaboration, you know, has been mentioned. There can be some egos. We need to put our egos aside, work together and as a collective, and actually make people feel that their voice is not only heard, is making a difference and is moving things forward.
Great, thanks, Jo. Andrea, last on my screen, but not on my list. So
something actually I think relevant to what Jo has just said, that what has struck me is while I've been talking about key themes and what's come out of things, everyone today and people who aren't in this have very personalised experiences which are unique to them. So we need to be careful about that and appreciate and think about that in particular as we move forward in the NHS and progress the development of the Armed Forces Family Support Network and our other commitments. That yes, there are key themes, but everyone has their own unique experience, as Jo just said. And something that's popped in my mind throughout the day in relation to that is a commissioning for carer principle in the NHS, which is think family, think carer. So we always need to have carer in mind as we're progressing work for families. You know, what systems are in place to identify carers and not just families, and making sure we're considering that. No, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So I have Tracy Park and Helen Goff. I don't know if either of you are still with us. I can't see you.
I'm here.
Tracy, well, you volunteered. What's your review of the day?
Well, I think it's just been a great opportunity to sort of share learning with different organisations, different speakers, different points of view. I think sharing best practice, and it's all about collaboration at the end of the day. I'm going to take away and read lots of this literature that's been advertised in the chat box, and hopefully get some hints and tips on how to, move forward with best practice in everything we're doing.
Great stuff. Thanks, Tracy. And actually, I just endorse that. There is a huge amount in the chat, which we will make sure gets sent round along with the recording. But since there are no kind of further questions, I think I'm going to wrap up the day a little bit early. I think sometimes these calls on Teams are even more exhausting than in the flesh. But the first thing I would say is a massive thank you to everyone who has spoken today, be it by film or live, or indeed both. And special thanks, I think, to Emma, Jo and Paul for sharing their very personal experiences of caring. I think we really do appreciate that. It's often quite difficult to talk about your own experiences. I think also very important for me is to thank the team behind the scenes who put together today and whose blood pressure ratings certainly this morning were off the Richter scale with some tech challenges. So a particular shout out to Paula, Steve and Helen and the rest of the team who put today together, who've kept everything going seamlessly in the face of adversity. I've learned a huge amount today, and I think particularly in the context of the two worlds colliding, there are many things that I knew and realised about the military from when I worked at SAFA a number of years ago, and there's many things I know about unpaid carers. But I think what today has shown is that when these two worlds do collide, it can be a very different story dependent on the support systems around you. And there's much work to do to kind of ensure equality. I think starting the day with Neil Churchill telling us that now a third of NHS staff identified as an unpaid carer alongside their day job, it really struck home to me the importance of the normalisation piece, that recognition, both self-recognition and societal recognition, as well as recognition by institutions like the NHS and like the military. That is vital. They don't want their people to leave, because of their caring responsibilities. They need to find ways to support them to do both, and if they want to, of course. And I think that's a vital lesson. And I think a key part of my organisation's new strategy is to widen recognition. And I repeat my plea from this morning to encourage your networks to tick that carer box on the census. It's a good place to start. It's a good place to get a benchmark. It's a good place to start talking about caring and encourage people to say, yes, I am caring actually. And so I will tick that box. And that benchmark will help us push for better services right across all of the systems. I'm always struck by the personal stories of carers, and Jo and Emma particularly, thank you for stepping up at such short notice to tell your personal stories, which it must have been challenging enough to record, never mind then repeat live again. So thank you. I think your reality is what needs to keep us working to make life better for carers. And Sue very definitely made me think, and I shall be using the phrase trophic cascade as often as I possibly can in every conceivable context. I very much hope that we will see you all in person at the 4th event in 2022. But if you would like to stay connected to the Commitment to Carers team, please sign up to the NHS Future Collaborations platform, the Commitment to Carers group, to access publications, funded public project reports, webinar recordings, blogs, case studies, future events, workstream, etc. And to get access, you can email england.nhsthinkcarer@nhs.net. And that email can also be used for any queries to contact any member of the team. And also follow the Commitment to Carers team on Twitter for more workstream updates. But I think that's probably everything from us today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your questions, for your interaction in the chat, and for caring about carers in the military. And I will close the event now. Thank you very much indeed.